BehaveAI is a video analysis framework that can detect, classify, and track animals, objects, and their behaviors from movement. The framework converts motion into color gradients that both you as a human annotator and computer deep learning neural networks can easily interpret, showing the direction, speed, and even acceleration of moving objects or body parts. And in this video, I'll show you how to use the BehaveAI framework. First, I'll briefly describe how the framework works. So it starts with a video sequence as a series of still frames. It then creates a second stream where the differences between frames over time are given false colors. So white and blue colors show the differences between the current and previous frame. Green blends differences over a larger range of frames going further back in time. And finally, red shows differences over an even longer time window reaching even further back. And taken together, this rainbow of colours left behind a moving object or limb gives a clear impression of its speed, direction, and acceleration. BehaveAI uses primary classifiers first to search for objects or behaviours across both motion and static streams. So we can specify a range of primary classes, and the ability to use static and or motion streams means that we can separate the tasks of detection and classification. So we can always use whichever one of these streams is most effective for a particular job. So just to reiterate, primary classifiers, they take the entire frame of the static stream and search for whatever static primary classes there are. And they take the entire frame of the motion stream and search that for any of these motion primary classifiers. So in this example, I'm using the semaphore flies, where we want to work out the behavior of each fly and work out whether it's a male or a female. And in this case, the behaviors we're looking at is the courtship display. So that's males displaying at females, whether they're flying, walking, or at rest. So these motion behaviors, displaying, flying, and walking, they are of course best done using the motion stream. They're very obvious. And for example, when there's the courtship display, the wings are a blur, but the wings are a blur when they're flying. So in a given static frame, these behaviors, they couldn't be distinguished, but it's trivially easy to work out the difference from the motion stream. But when they're not moving, then of course resting flies are best detected from the static stream. So we've got this mix of primary motion and static primary classes. Optionally, BehaveAI also offers hierarchical classification. So this can use secondary classifiers, and each time something is found by one of those primary classifiers, it's cropped and sent on to secondary classification. And again, this can use static or motion streams, whichever is most effective in a given job. And in this case, I'm using the secondary classifier to work out whether each fly is a male or female. And this can be determined from the subtle differences in wingtip markings, that the males have these white spots and the females don't. But when the wings are a blur, so the courtship display or flying, you can't work out the sex. So only the walking motion primary class is sent for being sexed, and the resting behavior is sent to be sexed as well. And so finally, these are combined together to give us, in each frame of video footage, it's working out the behavior of each fly, it's working out its sex, and also Kalman trackers are used to track each individual, so that even if one fly flies in front of another, it should be able to keep track of it. So we can then just use a batch script to feed videos through this framework, and it will give us a spreadsheet of who is where, when, and what exactly they're doing, and all of these interactions, and so on. So this example is a fairly complex example with a hierarchical model structure, but of course much more simple structures can be classified too. So in the rest of this video, I'm just going to show you how to set up the framework and then how to set up different settings. First, you'll need to install BehaveAI on your system. So go to the GitHub repository and download the zip file here, which contains all of the code that you need. So open up this zip file and extract the contents to somewhere sensible on your system. So here I've produced a BehaveAI folder in my home directory. So if you're used to running Python scripts yourself, you just need to run this behaveai.py script. So Here I'm loading it up in Genie, which is a nice lightweight Python editor, and then just run this script, and here we have BehaveAI up and running. And so this is a way that you can get this working on your system on any platform. But we've also included a straightforward to use Linux launcher. So on Linux systems, you can just click Properties and enable this script as an executable program, and then right click and run as program. The first time you run the script, it will download all of the files in the background required. So Python works with a virtual environment, and what this does is it creates a virtual environment on your system. So it creates this Ultralytics virtual environment system where all of the Python packages are installed for you. Alternatively, in Windows, you can do exactly the same. So here I've got the Windows setup, and if you just double click this Windows launcher .bat file, just double click that and give it permission to run. Again, the first time this runs, it will install everything in the background and set up all the Python packages in the virtual environment. But thereafter, you just need to double click it again to run the system. You'll notice after the first time we run it that it's created this projects directory. And this is where all of the files associated with each project will be stored, so all of the annotations and so on as we create different projects. So once we've installed BehaveAI, we can set up our first project. So we just need to run it and click New Project here. And I'll use the grass moth example to start with. And now I've done that, if we go back to the working directory, here you'll see projects, and here now we have this grass moth directory, and in here is where all of the grass moth project is stored. So it's settings files, but also we'll see later it creates the annotation, and models and things are all stored in here for each project that we create. And this clips directory that's empty now is a good place to put all the video files that you'll be using for your annotation. Or you can, in the settings, specify your own path. If we look at this grass moth example, have a look at one of these videos. These are videos of grass moths just taking off against a background. And as you'll see from the video, this is moving camera. The grass moth there, it just flew up. It's very obvious when it's in flight, but as soon as it's paused, there it's flying. In any given still frame, it's incredibly difficult to see. So here is the grass moth in a still frame, and with movement, it's quite easy to see it, but in any given still frame, very difficult. So this is something that BehaveAI can excel at. So the annotation video is all put in clips in the projects directory there. And then we need to set up the project settings. So if you click this settings thing, it will bring up all of the options for the settings you want. Here we've got the primary motion, primary static, secondary static classes. So here we specify all the classes that we want. And this is a super simple project. All we want to do is find that moth. So I will just add moth as one class. And here we give it a hotkey, which I'll give it M. We can choose a color that we want to associate with this class. In ignore secondaries, that's if we've got a hierarchical model and we don't want this to be sent to the secondary model, so we don't need that. And for now, we can leave everything else as basically the default. We can specify our own video paths. So this is the default one that has been set, but we can select our own elsewhere on our system if we want. This is the path where it's looking for training videos, so the clips directory. You should keep your working videos in here, because if you do that, it means that going back to inspect your dataset or rebuilding your dataset, it can use those videos. If you don't have a clips directory, because you can just pull up any video you want, it won't be able to rebuild your settings later. And then we also have an input directory for batch processing, so that's where your batch videos would be once you've built a model, and this is the output directory where it should output all the results. The motion strategy, we can have a play with this, but for now let's just leave it at defaults and have a look. And the model type, again, we can leave this at defaults and have a look. The validation frequency is the proportion of frames that you annotate that should be sent to the validation dataset as opposed to the training dataset. Here we can specify the type of model we want, so YOLO 11, and then the different sizes of models, so nano, small, medium, and large. Nano and small are generally absolutely fine. The number of epochs for training those models, and likewise for the secondary. Use CNN is useful if you have certain types of processing architecture where you don't have GPU acceleration. For example, on a Raspberry Pi, it works much better with NCNN. It's a different kind of deep model that can process fast on some systems. And you can specify the confidence threshold. Default is 0.5. The dominant source can either be set to motion, static, or whichever is higher confidence. This is when, for example, you've got an object that is detected in both its motion and its static, which might be the case. Which one should it use as the dominant source? Often, actually, motion is the most sensible one here. Then we have the tracking filter things where, again, if you have two things detected near to each other, what is the distance threshold by which they should be combined into one object, and also the Kalman filter processing settings. And then display settings, this is just for the graphics, how thick the lines should be and how big the fonts should be. Okay, so let's save these settings and have a look. Now we just need to click Annotate, and it will give us all of a list of the videos in our clips directory. So if I just click moth 1, here we have the annotation screen where we can draw boxes around stuff. And if I press spacebar, it flips between the static and the motion mode for the same frame. So I'm just pressing spacebar here and hopping between them. And there's a bar at the bottom here or at the top in Windows to select where in the video should be. And I'm just going to zoom through until we find that moth taking off. Look, here it is. Here's the moth taking off. And you'll notice if I hover my mouse above where the moth is, we can see at the bottom right of the screen, you can see a video clip of that section. And on the right center, you can see the motion stream zoomed in, and in the top right, you can see the static frame zoomed in as well. So here we can just select the moth. So I'm pressing M for moth. There's only one class. And here, look, we could draw a box over this, but let's have a look at the different settings modes. So here I'm not super happy that this moth is as salient as it could be. So if we go through, look, it's quite salient. The moth is quite obvious to see in this footage, but we can play with the motion settings to actually make it more obvious. So if I close this and we go back to settings, we change the motion strategy now to sequential. Exponential leaves long, smooth tails behind things, whereas sequential shows the previous 4 frame differences very clearly. Luminance weight, that's how much the static, the brightness of the scene should be blended with all of the false color. And actually, let's set that to 0. We really don't want much luminance. These RGB multipliers, that's just, it's a weighting function for each of the red, green, and blue channels of the motion. So if we want that to be more intense, we could put these up a bit to so. Frame skip is something that you should use if you want to look further back in time. It effectively, it skips a given number of frames. So if you want your false color from motion to search further backwards in time, if I put this to 1, it would skip every other frame in the analysis, and it wouldn't slow anything down. It would just mean that you are seeing further backwards in time. And if I were to click chromatic tail only, that's something that only works with exponential. That means that we don't have the white for the most recent frame. We only end up with the rainbow colors left behind a moving object. Again, we don't want that now. For now, let's stick with sequential for this moth. Let's go annotate again, and we can have a look at how different this looks now. So here, the RGB has gone up, so much more bright differences, and here there's much more dramatic differences in color, and maybe this is too extreme, particularly when the camera's moving. But when that moth takes off, look how brightly colored it is. It's very easy to see. So now instead of a kind of long tail that was difficult to see, a tail of colors, it's got these bright white, then blue, then green, then red, showing the different frames. And if I use the arrow keys to move frame by frame, you can see. So this is a bit too bright. So I'm going to put those RGB numbers down a little bit, back to, let's say, 333. And let's go back to annotate. So you want to ideally play with these settings to see what you think gives you the best kind of settings for the kind of motion in your scene that you're seeing. So now if we go to where the moth takes up, look how incredibly obvious the moth is now against its background. So all we need to do is go through a bunch of videos and draw boxes. When you draw a box, draw them as tightly as possible to the outline. So I'm choosing here to draw a box that just encompasses all of these different colors. I draw a box, so click and release to draw a box, and then press enter. It's critical you press enter, otherwise it's not saved. And then I could just go on to the next frame, but we don't want to kind of overburden the model with lots of very similar things. So let's move on a few frames, just clicking forward like so. And I can use the zoomed in boxes on the right hand side to make sure I get the position right. And I can just do this lots and lots of times, so that I build up a nice data set. And then when I'm done with that video, I can just click annotate and choose next video. And again, don't choose all your videos. You want to use a representative sample of your videos and just use the ones that make most sense. So here we've got the moth taking off in this video. Again, if I go to the static frame, that moth is completely invisible. Look, you can't see that at all. But here we can see it's left behind a nice obvious tail that the deep learning models will be able to detect very easily. I'll do one last one there. Now there's also tools to inspect the data set. So if I click this, it will allow me to see those frames that I've annotated. So here I have a frame annotated, and I can use the arrow keys to hop between them. And it just lets me check that my data set is good. And if you look at the bar at the top, it tells you the exact name of the frame and so on. Okay, and if I want, I can delete that. So I can right click on anything in any frame, and that it gets rid of that annotation, and I can redraw it if necessary, and then press enter again, and that is resaved. You may also notice that if I hover this over here, there is a grey box drawn over the visible side. That's because of the settings that we have specified. Motion blocks static here. And this is a good setting to have enabled if you have a mix of primary motion and primary secondary classifiers. It means that motion will always take precedence, and motion information is almost always more salient, more reliable than static. And this blocks, it draws a grey box over the thing so that it blocks the primary static from seeing things that aren't labelled, which would otherwise confuse the model. So it's also worth looking at the project folder to understand what's going on. So if I go back to, so this is where BehaveAI is installed. Here is the projects directory, and here is the grass moth directory. And you'll see now we've got these two extra directories created. These are the annot motion and annot static. They're the annotation data sets for motion and static. And if I go into this motion one, it's split up into images, labels, and masks. Masks is the grey boxes used for hiding things. If we go into images, that's split into training and validation. And if we go into training, these are the still frames that we are going to be using for training. And the validation, so two have gone randomly to the validation set that are here as well. And so you can manually manipulate the files here, but remember, if you were to delete a file in the training data set, you would also need to delete its entry in the labels and masks as well. So there's parallel entries for each thing in the training and validation data sets across images, labels, and masks. Okay, so let's imagine I've built up a nice big data set. Well, I say big. Maybe just start by annotating around 20 to 50 examples of each class that you've got. So I've only got moths in this example. So let's say I've drawn boxes around 50 moths from lots of random videos. All I need to do then is press this button, train and batch classify, and it will build that model the first time you run it. Okay, so this is just a quick example, but here is a model we prepared earlier. As soon as you've trained a model, it creates, for each model that's created, a new directory here in your project's working directory. And if we go into here, it saves a copy of the settings that were used for your project when this model was trained. So if you change your settings later, you can keep a track of that. And it keeps track of the number of annotations used in training this. And then if we go into train here, this is where we can look at the quality of the model. And you've got the confusion matrices and so on. But now let's suppose we just made this model with, let's say, 50, just an initial model. Now when we click annotate and go back to some of these videos, it will be in auto-annotation mode. So it's actually guessing, using that first model we've made, it's guessing where it thinks there is a moth. So every frame that we have loaded up, it will show us, it's coming up with, it's guessing where there is a moth. Look, so here it's doing generally a very good job of tracking this moth. Sometimes, look, it was missing, here it's made an error, it's missing that white bit at the start. So what I can do, now I'm in auto-annotation mode. I can redraw, so I can right-click something that's done wrong and redraw it. Things that it's done correctly, I can just accept. And so here I'm just pressing enter to accept things that's done right. Don't flood your data set with correct things though. Focus on those cases that it gets wrong or that it has low confidence with. So you can add a few of these, but really focus on those false positives as well. So we can go through this footage and see, is it making any errors? Like here's doing a really good job, but it's less confident with this one, only 0.78. So let's add that one because it's doing a really good job. Here it's missing a bit, so if I wanted, I could add that manually, and so on. You get the idea. And this allows you, once you're in this training mode, it allows you to very rapidly expand the size of your annotation data set because it's doing a lot of the labeling work for you, particularly in complicated scenes. Let's suppose also that it's made a few false positives, like there's some motion in the scene and it's made an error somewhere. So here is a fly going across. Look, that's not a moth, so I will untick that, and now I will enter this blank frame. So there's nothing labeled, but this is where it previously made an error. There's a fly flying across rather than a moth. So I'll enter these ones, and these just enter into your training data set empty frames where it knows there isn't something that it could be a mistake. So it's useful for training it. And so once we've got a much larger data set, again, we just need to click this train and batch classify button. It will retrain our model. It'll notice that you've added more annotations and ask you to retrain it. An older model, like if we've already got a model there, it won't delete it. It will rename it backup 1 and create a new model. So you can always go back to previous models if you want. And once you have a decent model, you can look at these confusion matrices to see how well your model is doing. So in this example, with the grass moth, it is correctly detecting a moth, so the true is a moth in motion, and it's doing that most of the time. Out of a validation set of, it would be 117 moths, it's getting it wrong twice. So it's classifying its background incorrectly twice, and it's making a few false errors though. So it's classifying background noise as moth motion. This number you can't rely on too much, because if there's a really big data set of blank images, this number would be higher, of course. So you can't necessarily put too much faith in that one. And you have the normalized confusion matrix here, and all of the other standard YOLO output with which to test how well your model is doing. Okay, now let's try a more complex project. So let's, I can just make a new project here and go flies, and I'll set up an example of the semaphore flies. So whenever we load up BehaveAI, we can just switch project like so. It's super easy. So let's go to the flies project. And again, it will have created now a flies directory here. So here's our working directory, projects, flies. And I could put in some clips here. Let me just copy across one of these files for now. And if we have a look, this is a video where we've got these semaphore flies, and here's a male displaying at females, the females flying around. And let's say we want to classify each individual, what it's doing, and work out its sex in each frame. Okay, so let's go to the settings here. And now we've got a much more complicated model to specify. So from motion, we are going to have the courtship display, and that we could have D for display. This is the hotkey that will be attached to that class. Sorry, let's add a fly. And let's call that Y, because we can get confused with names otherwise. And let's have walk with W. We don't want a secondary motion. I clicked that box accidentally. And static, remember, it rests. When the flies aren't moving, it's easiest to use the static stream of video. You can't see them from motion. So we can do R for that. And we are going to use a secondary classifier of sex. So now we need male and female. And so this is where we'll use the letter F so we don't get confused with flying. Motion block static, yes, we definitely want that ticked, because otherwise, whenever we input let's say a walking fly, it'll be classed as walking and not resting. But the primary model will still have access to the frames where the walking one might be, and so it will try and train itself to not find walking flies, even though it doesn't know if they're walking or resting. So you definitely want motion block static whenever you have both primary motion and primary static classifiers that are selecting similar things to each other, similar objects. You should have one of these blocking the other. And normally it makes more sense to have motion block static because that's the more reliable one. Video paths we'll just leave as their defaults. This is the clips directory, remember. The motion strategy, we can probably just leave these as defaults. These are good general defaults to use in most cases. Likewise, model type, these are sensible defaults, and so on. Okay, so save that, and that sets it up. And then let's go to annotate and select that video file that we have for annotation. And so here, if I'll press spacebar to switch to the static view, and now if I just go through, you can see the kind of video we're dealing with. And so now I'll switch to motion view. The motion is it's not very bright, so maybe we should up the RGB numbers a little bit. But otherwise, this is looking good. You can see how a flying fly leaves behind this nice trail behind it. A still fly obviously has no color around it at all, and then as soon as they walk, for example, or do a courtship display, it's pretty obvious. Look, here's the start of a courtship display with the wings opening and closing and so on. And here is a walking female just starting to move, and again, very obvious from the motion stream. If we go to static, you wouldn't know whether that female or that male is moving or what they're doing. So let me just go back to the settings, and I'm going to increase the intensity of the false color by putting these numbers up a little bit. And let's have another go at annotating that. It is fine to change all of those those motion settings after you've built your annotation dataset. It will automatically notice that you've changed your settings and offer to rebuild your your entire annotation data set. And that's fine. It might take a few minutes if you've got a really big annotation data set. But it will rebuild it and let you rebuild your models, retrain your models after you've changed settings. So you can actually have a play with which settings work best in your system. Okay, so here we've loaded up the video, and look how much more colorful the motion cues are now. I think that's really nice. That should work well. And then we just need to start annotating. So again, well, now we've got a hierarchical model, so we need to be careful about how we specify it. So here we have a female. So I will press F for female, and she's just at rest. So I'll press R, and then I'll draw a box around her, like so. Here we've got a flying, and we don't know its sex. So it's just a flying one, so I'll just draw a box around its whole flight. It's calling it female. So that's a good point. I haven't specified that I don't want it to note the sex when it's flying or displaying. So let me close this down again, go back to settings. And look here, these boxes here, displaying and flying, ignore secondary. I want to tick these because when a fly is displaying, we know it's a male, so we don't need to know its sex. We already know it. When it's flying, though, we're not going to be able to work out what sex it is. So we can click this ignore secondary. And okay, let's annotate again and go back. And here we go. Now, if we look, here is a female at rest, so I can switch between these. I'll press R for rest and F for female. So the primary and secondary have been specified with keyboard shortcuts. Draw a box over that, and now it says rest female. Here we have that's just taking flight. So let's class that as flying. And now you see it doesn't care, it doesn't give you a sex associated with that. And here's another flying individual, so I'll just draw a box over that. And here we have a resting, so R, and it's a male. So we'll just draw a box over that. When I press the rest hotkey, it automatically flips me to the static stream, and when I press any of the motion things, it flips me to the motion stream. So if I press D now for display, it will automatically switch this frame. Okay, in every frame, everything must always be annotated, like have a label around it. So don't let there be a fly over here with no box drawn around it, because that will really confuse the annotation. So in every frame you ever enter into your annotation data set, everything needs to be annotated. This is critically important. When I'm done, press enter, and I'll just move on to another part of the video and choose something else. Look, here's a male that is displaying. So see how the wings are a blur, and that could easily look like it's taking off or flying. But it's not, it's displaying, and it's, I'll draw a box over it. Displaying often comes up as blue. Here we've got a male that's just wiggling one of its wings. That is actually part of the display, the courtship display as well, let's say. Here we've got the female who is walking. So female F and then W for walking, and I will enter that like so. And here we have a resting male, so I will enter that like so. And so on. Now let's suppose that there are situations where you genuinely don't know what's going on. You don't want, let's say something is partially occluded, or you don't know whether this fly is a fly, or maybe it's just a moth that flew through, and you don't want to confuse them all. You don't want to train it to ignore that, but you also don't want to train it to remember it as a fly. What we can do is draw grey boxes over things. So this is a really useful feature. Anything that you're not sure about and that you are confident you don't want the model to be sure about, you can draw a grey box over. Likewise, you can delete these by right-clicking them, just as you can the other ones. So grey boxes are quite a powerful tool to be able to specify whether you want to input things or not. Yeah, as I say, things that are partially occluded can often be. But What's important to not use grey boxes for? So don't use grey boxes in instances where they're borderline between one behavior or another. You should have in your head a very clear picture for where one behavior transitions to another behavior type. Okay, it looks like I've added everything here. So again, I'll just enter this frame and so on. Okay, so as before, if we go back to the projects directory, so here we've got our installed files, and here we've got this flies working directory. Now you'll notice that we've got all these annotations, and we've got these crop. These are the secondary annotations as well. So here's the primary motion. As before, we've got these images of each still frame that I used for training. And as before, I just need to click this train and batch classify, and it will build our first model, and then we can use that for auto annotation. Okay, so now let's imagine we have built up that initial training data set. We've got sort of 20 to 50 examples of each class added to our annotations. We can click train and batch classify here, and that will generate these new models and train them all. And then if we go to the projects working directory, you'll see it creates these different models. So we've got the primary motion model, but also a primary static one, and then the secondary models as well. So this is determining sex from all of the resting flies and all of the walking flies. So a slightly different model used in those different situations. So now we've built those initial models, we can see how well it is working. So when we click annotate now, it will find those models and use them to guess the annotation. So if we go through here, in this example, here's lots of flying flies, and it seems to be calculating them correctly. It thinks that's a resting male, which it is, so it's doing all of them very well. So we can re-enter that and move on and find a suitably different frame. And again, we just want to enter frames where it's low in confidence on anything, and just look out for errors and that it's making and correct them. Look, here it's making an error, but this is an interesting one. It's consistently confusing displaying, this is a displaying fly, for a resting fly. And actually that's probably because of the settings that we've selected. So if I close this and go to settings, there's an important setting with the model type, where we select when we have multiple sources of we have the static and the motion model together. When they both detect something at the same time, which should be used? At the moment it's using confidence. So that means that if the confidence for a resting fly is higher than that of the displaying fly, then the resting will take precedence. But actually motion is almost always more salient and more correct. So if I select that now to motion, now when we go to annotate, it will hopefully recognize those cases of a displaying fly and correctly. So here we are back to roughly the same point, and look, it's correctly now seeing this as a displaying. So it's still making some errors. So where it makes errors like this, I can again just correct it by deleting that, adding the new annotation, and so on. And yeah, so we just want to go through the data set and keep adding more and more examples of all these things, check where it's making errors, add things that it's doing well, correct things that it's doing slightly wrong. So here again is a displaying fly, so I'll add that again as a displaying fly, and so on. And once it's done this a lot, we can check. So here's the fly taking off, and it's doing a really good job of tracking this in flight. Look, even in situations like this, it's able to track the flying fly despite the cluttered scene behind. Yeah, so once we think it's working well, what we can do is decide we're done with the model. There's no set point. There's no performance at which you think, okay, this is a perfect model. It will probably never be perfect. You'll only end up with a model that is as good as the task you need it to be good at. And some things will always have higher error than others, particularly if you're working with messy natural footage. So once you've got a working model that you want to actually put to use, you need to put any clips into your input directory, which you can also specify in the settings. But let's say that we have We've put this flies 18 file in here. Then all we need to do is click train and batch classify again. And it's already got the model, so it won't retrain them, but it will then process the video and put the output here in this output directory. And here it creates a video, so you can look through it and you can check that it's annotating everything correctly. So here it's generally doing a good job on everything. So you've got this visual inspection ability, and also it creates this this spreadsheet, this comma separated value spreadsheet. And if we look at this, in every frame of the video footage, so here's frame 2, it detects every fly. It gives each fly its own ID number, so fly 1, 2, 3, 4. It gives you the XY coordinates of that fly. And here it's saying that flies 1, 2, and 3 are at rest according to the primary static. Although this is also displaying. So because both primary classifiers are being used, it's both displaying as resting and displaying. But if it's displaying, remember that one should take precedence. And it's higher confidence as well. And it also, if they're at rest or walking, it also sends them to the secondary classifier to work out whether they're male or female, and so on. So you get a big spreadsheet like this of all the things. And if we then go to the next frame 3, again you've got fly ID 1, 2, 3, 4, and those 3, the first ones are still at rest, but that male is still displaying, and so on. This is what the output looks like. Okay, just as a final example, I'm going to show a live processing example. So I'll just show you a project I have made earlier, very briefly. So this is an eye movements thing that's just set up to track eye movements. So it tracks eyes, and it looks at, first it detects the eye with the primary class, and then it uses a secondary motion classifier. So this is a hierarchical model, finding one thing quickly, and then using the motion stream to secondarily look at the behavior of that eye, whether it's open, closed, closing, or opening. So that's what the project looks like. And if you click this live button, it checks the cameras that you've got installed on your system. So it should give you a list of cameras here. Choose a resolution that works for your camera. This is negotiated later. And so I've already got some examples here, but if you just do, let's start the camera. This is just my webcam looking at me, and here it is working live. And every time I blink, it should notice these different things happening. But for now, let's disable that. If I click manual recording here, you'll see this switches to manual recording. And then I will stop that and quit. And if we go into the projects directory, that has created a new manual recording here. That's the one I just made. And then what we can do is annotate from that one I've just recorded. So we can use the same camera. So here it is, the video I've just made, and it's already auto-annotating what it thinks should be going on. Yeah, so that's the kind of live options. And so there's a few options here that are worth pointing out. Have a play with the resolution. I find that some webcams on the same system can run at much higher frame rates than others. Yeah, who knows? There's a complex mix of hardware. On Raspberry Pis, they can run moderately quickly. On this laptop, I tend to be able to run this kind of resolution video at 30 frames a second with one camera, but that only runs at 15 frames a second with a different camera. So the important things we have here are the ability to manually record clips that you use for training. We can then, once we have a model that's working, we can start the camera and tell it to only record when it detects something going on in that video. So you say you've got some lab setup or something, it can record videos and output them, and then everything that it detects is just output here to this output directory with CSV files for those detections. And when it's running, we can select the stream that's used. So here we've got the detector enabled at the moment, and if I blink, it will detect my eye movements. Pretty creepy to look at. I'll disable it right now. But we can look at the static stream like this, or I can click this to look at the motion stream, and this shows you what's going on. And just as before, we could play with the settings to make that right. This camera, the light's a bit low at the moment, so this is running at 17 frames a second. But when you enable your classifier, look, it's going, this computer can handle 17 frames a second at this resolution very easily. But what you can do when you're recording these clips is you can throttle the whole system to a given frame rate that's similar to the frame rate that it's, the maximum frame rate that your system can handle. So with this is pretty much all of the settings that you need to be able to get it to work in theory. And then you can basically record things live. And if you want to get into code, you could then have this, act robotically to do something once the detection is made. So the code's not really easy to hack into and change things. Okay, so that is an overview of the BehaveAI framework, and I'll be really excited to see all of the projects that everyone out there uses this for.